And Donald Trump's escalating trade war impacts many sectors, as we've been reporting. But that also includes pharmaceutical drugs. And the White House has issued a new warning to drug makers to cut their prices or face the consequences. For more on this, we are joined by Mina Tadrous. He's an associate professor at the University of Toronto's Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy. Professor Tadrous, thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you for having me.
So I just want to clarify for the audience a little bit, because they might be thinking, since we talk so much about tariffs on the network, that this is a threat that the president is making to Canadian producers. This is something in terms of a series of letters to 17 major pharmaceutical companies in the United States saying, lower our prices immediately by charging other countries more. And he's wanting them to implement the most favored nation pricing policy. Walk us through this most favored nation policy and whether it's viable.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is one of many actions that are currently happening in the pharmaceutical sector from this current administration. And what we saw most recently was this letter go out to these 17 CEOs of the largest pharmaceutical companies based on spending that produce drugs. And many of them are American corporations that are headquartered in the United States. And what the request, there's a variety of different requests, but the major one is to lower pressure of pricing by making sure that the U.S. is not charged any number or any price that's different than any other country based on an adjustment based on GDP. Now, what this means is that the sticker price or the list price of what you go walk into in the pharmacy would have to match that. Now, this is another kind of mechanism of like a relatively smart, issue, which is that most Americans, it's a bipartisan issue. Most Americans struggle with the pharmaceutical industry. The prices are the highest in the world. And this has been an issue for the last 20, 30 years. But this policy doesn't really address the main problem, which is that the vast majority of Americans get their drugs paid for by insurance companies. There's a complex system of pharmacy benefit managers and insurance companies, and some out of pocket. And then what this ends up meaning is that sticker price is very different from the prices that are negotiated in the background.
Would you
for
be able...
Canadians, No, I was going to say for Canadians, what the issue becomes is that our sticker price may have to come up, because if they're going to start matching up against prices in the U.S., we're going to be one of the countries that are pinpointed.
That was exactly what I was going to ask you, so thank you for jumping in on that. But on this issue, can you give us an example of, maybe not between Canada and the United States, but what a drug costs in the United States versus what it might cost in Vietnam? And I would imagine this is difficult to not base it on GDP, because people in Vietnam cannot pay a higher price than what people in the United States are paying.
Yeah, so, drug pricing is a really interesting thing. And this is kind of what I was trying to get at with my answer. The companies come out and they pick a price, and that becomes the sticker price. But that's not often the price that are actually being paid. So in Canada here, if you're covered by the government or an insurance company, they have negotiated a drug price that is sort of secret in the background. And so that sticker price comes, and it's not anywhere near what you're actually being charged for it. Now, every country is charged a different price depending on their mechanisms. So, for example, in Canada, we actually have a very similar structure to what's being proposed by the administration. So we have a patented prices review board, which makes sure that the Canadian price is not astronomically higher. Now, the thing in the U.S., they don't have any legislative mechanisms to control U.S. drug pricing, which kind of points out that, is it this sort of heavy stick of sending letters, or is it just smarter policy that needs to be developed to help them control their pricing?
Now, the president has said he's giving these 17 pharmaceutical companies 60 days to implement what he wants. And he says then he's threatening to deploy every tool in our arsenal. This is a direct quote from the president, if companies do not follow through. How do you think these companies are going to respond?
Yeah, I think what you're going to start seeing is some sort of negotiation, which seems to be the case in the theme with this administration that states, let us do this for drugs that are going to come out. The problem is that for a lot of their pricing, there's already been kind of like negotiated contracts. You can imagine probably hundreds of contracts of how they're doing this in this case. I think what you're going to see is and we've already sort of seen this prior, because this administration already put out an executive order asking for this most favored nation clause a couple of months ago. And so they've started doing things like, establishing what we call direct-to-consumer programs, where they will sell the drug directly at a special price for people who don't have insurance, offering rebate cards to people. But I think what this order is also asking them to do is to lower the price for Medicare and Medicaid, which is a very complicated thing because unlike Canada, it's not the government that directly pays. There's a convoluted system where there's these benefit managers, a lot of middlemen, and a lot of insurance companies involved. And so I don't see something this complicated be disentangled in 60 days.
And in terms of the Canadian pharmaceutical industry, what is going to be the direct impact to us?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So our team recently did an analysis of just, the most common price differences of the sticker price of the most recent drugs. And what we find is on average, the Canadian price is about 50% less. So the US price is double for most new drugs that have come out in the last few years. Now, this can range in a really wide way. And so what this means is that drug companies are going to be making choices about what price they're going to be asking to come in. So I think for newer drugs, we're going to see the sticker price come higher. I don't think that this changes those negotiations of what the price will actually be in the end of the day. But what we might start seeing, which is what we're hopeful doesn't happen, is that there'll be delays as people try to figure out this chaos, right? As companies see what's going on in the US, which is the world's largest pharmaceutical market, they may delay the entry into Canada not knowing what price they have to pick. And so I think policymakers are thinking ahead about this to ensure that we have some flexibility to ensure that we don't slow down innovation coming to Canada.
And Professor Tadrous, do you know if in the ongoing negotiations, and you can argue how well they're going, between Ottawa and Washington, is this part of the conversation?
I think from the tariff conversation, the pharmaceutical cutoffs are part of the CUSMA negotiations, so they're currently being exempt. But I think there is a concern on a number of fronts, like pharmaceuticals that are coming from Canada to the US. We have billions of dollars of drugs, of Canadian generic products and some brand that are actually produced and exported to the US. But then the counter thing is that we also import lots of drugs coming in from the US. And so a lot of them are brand name. And so, there has been conversations, I believe, about using that as a mechanism. But, we urge policymakers to kind of continue to have the higher ground and leave pharmaceuticals out of it. Our major concern is that all of this maneuvering on a global scale may lead to supply chain disruptions and more shortages in a problem that we already have. I think most Canadians have seen or been affected by a shortage in the last few years. And so the more we mess around with how we get drugs and maneuver them in a global market, the more likely things will go wrong.
With other industries in this country, there's been a real push to diversify trade, lean more on European partners, lean more on Asian partners, and then also be more innovative in our own country and trade more internally. So would any of those also apply to the pharmaceutical industry?
100%. I think there's a few things that probably in this space we can be as Canadians thinking about. The first is, we have a really robust generic market. It's shrunk over the last 20 years, but we have a lot of companies that produce drugs, and the vast majority went to the US. There's a lot of countries now that are looking for high quality products. And so I think we could be looking at diversifying, supporting that marketplace, and kind of externalizing and exporting those drugs. The other thing is we have a really strong life science sector that produces really great innovation, but we have greatly underfunded science. And one of the things that's scary that's happening in the US is the kind of dismantling of the NIH and reduced funding that's happening. And the NIH per capita was funding so much of the drug innovation that's happening. So there's a big concern that we're going to pay the price in 5 to 10 years where that innovation doesn't happen. And I think there's a really great opportunity here for Canada to step in, fund science that could lead to great innovations, future companies, pharmaceuticals coming from here. We have great scientists, but we have a lack of resources and we underfund it in a very big way. So I think there's a really great chance to support our companies, support innovation, and step in to fill that void that's happening right now.
Mina Tadrous, always good to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
You too.